Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Ross Edwards. Ross Edwards is an author and meditation teacher. He is a native of Edinburgh who's currently living in Madrid. He is the author of an ebook called Spiral Dynamics Embodied, and you can find out more about Ross Edwards and his wonderful work at his website, deeppsychology.com. And there's a little hyphen in there in between deep psychology. Welcome, Ross Edwards.
Thank you, Nicole. And yes, the website, I just make it deliberately more complicated for everyone. Yeah, the hyphen is important.
The hyphen is important. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So if you Google Ross Edwards deep psychology, then you'll probably
yeah,
find him.
definitely another way to go.
Another way to go. So, Ross Edwards, you have published an ebook called Spiral Dynamics Embodied. What exactly is spiral dynamics?
Wow. Well, spiral dynamics is essentially it's a model, a theory, a description of the layers of complexity in human beings. People often talk about spiral dynamics as though it were a series of stages, describing a series of stages. I've thought about this stuff a lot over the years, and I've kind of came to the conclusion that stages can be a bit of a misleading term. So I'm going to say layers of complexity, and as we talk about spiral dynamics, everyone will understand why that is. Basically, it can sound quite abstract to begin with, but once when you study it a little bit, you can have this um, like an aha moment, like a moment of clarity, and you realize that this model is actually describing uh, your life, how you live your life, and how the way you've lived your life has evolved over the years from the moment you were born uh, to now. What spiral dynamics does is it basically talks about how our values, our worldview, our motivations, and how they how they evolve over time. And the spiral part of it, the name sounds kind of terribly complicated. I remember the first time I heard spiral dynamics, the name, and I don't know, it sounded something out of like calculus or something like that. And what it basically means is that we are human culture and human individuals, our development is like a spiral. It's this sort of unfolding process. And the more it unfolds, the sort of broader and more inclusive and more complex it becomes, but it still includes everything before. Like you can't have this wider part of the spiral without everything that has come before. So when we start out in life as infants, as babies, we start out, shall we say, small. We don't, our worldview is quite limited, our values are quite limited, our motivations are quite limited. As we grow as individuals, both sort of chronologically and in like psychological time, shall we say, our what spiral dynamics is saying is that we are growing in complexity in these dimensions: values, worldview, psychology, and motivations. Um, and yeah, just if that sounds a bit kind of abstract, stick with us because everyone that I know who has studied models of this kind, they end up having this moment of realization like, wow, I never saw my life like this before. And once you do, it's it recontextualizes everything and typically in a positive way.
So
How, how
So thank you for that, Ross Edwards. And many coaches use this model of spiral dynamics to help people understand where other people are in their human development. So
yeah,
sometimes as even as a medical intuitive healer, I'll watch people and I'll be like, why do they act that way? Well,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
they're operating by an inner set of values that may be different from my own, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and people like Tony Robbins, who's a very famous, world famous coach that many people know, he talks about the stages of human development. And I appreciate that you call it layers of complexity, because at the very
Mm,
bottom of the spiral of human dynamics, we're in survival mode, right?
yeah.
So, Ross Edwards, can you explain for our audience what are the age stages in the layers of complexity and spiral dynamics?
Yeah. I'll get to that in just a moment. I just also want to say that one thing that spiral dynamics recognizes, and I think this is really important, especially for um, people who like personal development and they like the idea of growing as a person. One thing that spiral dynamics says is that, and this is especially useful for coaches and psychologists and people who work with others on their in their own growth process. One thing that spiral dynamics reminds, in the original sort of theory, it says this a lot over and over again, is that you cannot have a person's individual spiral without corresponding life conditions. And well, that's quite a that's a big topic in and of itself. But one way of looking at it is each each of these levels um, sort of appeared on a grand scale in humanity at certain periods of time. And it tends to correlate with like technological advance and sort of political change and sort of these sort of bigger shifts that happen in society and in culture at large. So I just want to make that clear because everything that goes on inside us is it's corresponding and it's sort of responding and adapting to what we are perceiving around us. That doesn't always mean that our interior development matches the conditions outside. You can see that in a lot of our political leaders, for example. Their inner development's very poor and it can't respond to the problems in the world. But anyway, that's another topic.
Yes.
Um, the stages, to summarize them quickly, what you do in spiral dynamics is we use colors. And there's eight stages in spiral dynamics. Each has a different color. Um, just to quickly run through them, although if you type, and I'm not trying to self-promote, it's just because I've written a lot of articles about this. If you type deep psychology spiral dynamics into any search engine, you'll get all my articles on this topic. But basically, beige is the first level, and that's all about survival. And you mentioned that, Catherine. That's where we begin. And well, in certain life conditions, in certain areas of the world, in certain periods of history, that's all human beings did is survive. And there was nothing, there was no higher mental structures developed. There wasn't like any culture really. They didn't leave huge marks on the land, on the earth, because they were living in very basic conditions. Purple is the next level. That's called magic. You can see this in infants, and you can see this even in adults, like modern adults, with things like four-leaf clovers and Lucky Charms and um, superstitions and so on. Again, I don't want to oversimplify and say it's all about superstition, but that's sort of the basic. It's a magical worldview. Red is the next one. That's all about power. That comes on in early infancy when we start having a sense of agency and sort of um, desire to alter the world around us, which comes on very early on. Blue is mythic, and that's you can think of it as quite um, a rigid stage, a stage that we define ourselves in terms of our roles and the rules we must follow to be part of the social group or the culture that we're in, where our identity is very much blended with that, and we tend to um, we look to the mandates of authority to tell us how to live life and how to understand things. Orange is about success and sort of autonomy and about making it in the world and about um, having the ability to alter the world and be successful. Green is a communitarian stage. That's when we kind of realize it's kind of like the transition into green is, and again, I'm really very simplifying these stages just to make it quite precise and concise. But the transition into green is always a kind of realization that science doesn't explain it all, that materialism isn't that fulfilling, that seeking success for oneself has left you hollow and in need of sort of connection and of greater meaning. So green then is about sort of connection and sensitivity and living simply, connecting with the present, feeling our emotions and getting in touch with our inner world. Then something interesting happens. So I've just done 6 stages there, very briefly. Something interesting happens at this point. Everything we've done so far is called first tier. That's like the first set of stages. Then what comes after the next 2 stages, or the next 2 stages that spirodynamics covers, is called second tier. What basically happens is, and Claire Graves, who's one of the original theorists behind this, called this a monumental leap in meaning. And basically, his conclusion was that our motivations change from deficiency to abundance. We're no longer feel that we lack something and that the world lacks something, and we need to either fix the world or fix ourselves. We're actually sort of orientated towards contributing and giving and to um, being rather than doing and seeking. So the first stage of second tier is called yellow. That's called, well, it's got many names. I'm going to call it integrative, and we're going to talk a lot about yellow as we go on here. And finally, turquoise, holistic. So beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, turquoise. Now, obviously, it's a lot of information, but yeah, you can do a search, and I've got plenty of articles on that. If you like, what I could do is quickly summarize the 5 sort of final levels in this model and how they see the world, just to make it very concrete.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think you've done a great job explaining the 8 levels and the first and the second tier. So you want to do share more.
Yeah. Well, as I said, this model describes motivations, values, worldview, and psychology. So we're just going to run through from blue to orange to green to yellow to turquoise, what our worldview looks like. And if you look around you, like friends, people you know, the news, the culture at large, the world at large, these are the levels that are most active. These are the ones that are really where a lot of our organizations are. We're not really operating from beige and purple and red too much. Those are kind of, again, oversimplifying, but these come from sort of back in human history and back when we're infants. We've built higher layers on top of that. Basically, the worldview of blue, and this is very prevalent in sort of fundamentalist religious circles and the conservatives sometimes, traditional people. Basically, the worldview at blue is that life is governed by some sort of higher order system or principle that you must follow. And if you don't follow it, you're basically doing it wrong. Something as terrible is going to happen to you either now or after, you're going to go to hell if you don't follow Jesus's way. Or, if you're not, if you don't act like a true country person, then there's something wrong with you. It needs to be done this way. This is the way it's done. And this worldview, it tends to exclude all other systems of truth. So it'll say things like the Bible is the one and only real way to God, or the Quran is the one and only way, or my country is the only country in the world that's worth my time. This kind of thing, very absolutistic. Orange comes along and it says the world isn't governed by anything higher or beyond us. The world just is as it objectively appears. We can measure it, we can understand it, we can document it through science. The worldview orange is more inclusive because it says, okay, we've now got science, we've got maths, we've got biology, we've got physics, we've got chemistry. This doesn't just apply to one country or one religion or one people. It says this applies to the entire universe. Then green will come along and say, wait a minute, things aren't as clear cut as just being measurable and rational and logical. Things are relative. Our worldviews are relative. Truth is relative. It depends on who you are, what your life experience is, and where you were brought up, and what you've been told for your entire life to be true. Green recognizes that even the systems of truth that were created in the Enlightenment, which is like the Great Orange Awakening in the world, and by rationality, by logic, that is relative. So what green will tend to do is it'll open up to other systems of truth. And this is when we start studying Buddhism and Hinduism, and we start trying alternative practices and whatnot. Because now we're open to things that aren't just mental and rational, and not just modern. We sort of we take a lot more in. What yellow does is it says, okay, things are relative, but actually there is patterns governing the evolution of the entire world and the entire species, and there are many commonalities. So whilst the green worldview might say, okay, but what about Hinduism? What about Buddhism? What about these ancient religions? It tends to not be able to integrate them very well, and it can't look for the common thread. When you're at yellow, when you look out, you tend to understand how things connect together, and how things are naturally interrelated to one another. And then turquoise, I have to be honest, I'm not. Sometimes I question whether I've understood turquoise, both sort of intellectually and sort of in my first person experience. Basically, turquoise takes that to another level. And it just realizes to a deeper level that things are intrinsically interconnected. So yeah, I hope the By describing these worldviews, you realize that these stages are very practical and they're really in your face if you look for them. Um, so yeah.
And with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. You're listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. And we're listening to meditation teacher and author Ross Edwards explain spiral dynamics for us. We'll be right back. Ross Edwards. As a medical intuitive healer, part of what I do is help people understand themselves better. And I've had clients say to me, "You understand me better than my best friend who's known me for 20 years." And sometimes, as human beings, we look out into the world and we look at other people and they're doing certain things, whether it's a war someplace or a political agenda that's going on, and we think, I wouldn't do it that way. Well, part of so much conflict and misunderstanding in the world, I feel, is that we as human beings, we get so stuck in our worldview that you've beautifully explained that we have a really hard time understanding other people's worldview. So, for
Mhm.
example, if I'm in Orange and I believe that everything has to be documented and proven by science, then if I'm talking to someone with an integrative point of view in the yellow who says, there's all these things that are connected and interrelated, I might not agree with what they say or may not understand with what they say. Can you explain for our audience, Ross Edwards, how are these 8 stages in spiral dynamics relevant to our personal healing?
Oh, well, first of all, I think it's very healing to realize that these stages are a thing, and that while we don't want to reduce your life to a bunch of stages on a piece of paper, uh, that when you sort of get the message of what the model is saying, you realize that it really, it roughly charts out how you've been evolving and how you've been operating. And so part of that, I find, I mean, that's nice in and of itself, but what I think it can do is it can take a lot of the confusion away around our lives. You know, Uh, one thing I think that's happened that's going to get deep. One thing I think that's happened with the proliferation of the orange worldview over the last sort of 300 years, is we've lost a grand narrative for our lives. If you lived in the Middle Ages, it would be the church, probably, if you were in the West. And that would, the church and the religious institution, that would be like the grand narrative for your life. With the orange worldview, that's sort of been taken away a bit, and it's left us this hole, and we don't understand how do I fit in to everything else? I think one thing that spiral dynamics does for people is it shows in a non-dogmatic way that actually there is this bigger pattern going on. And I think that's very inspiring to people.
Yes, and it shows you, it can help you understand where you are and also where you may be evolving to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for example, if I'm stuck in blue, then my life is all about following rules, right? And rules
By and large.
that are set and established by someone outside of me, right? And so a progress might be to go, okay, well, I've been following all these rules, but they don't necessarily follow science. And then when I'm in orange and I'm focusing on success in the world based on science, then an evolution is to realize that there's this larger world around me and that it's incredibly fulfilling to be connected from my heart, from my soul to all these people around me. And then as I connect to everyone around me, and I begin to see patterns governing, and it's like, well, those people over there are thinking this way, and these people over there, and it all sort of makes sense. And we're all sort of doing the same sort of thing with using different language. Then we begin to see the connection. And I'm very much all about turquoise, and my word for turquoise would be oneness. So that when you realize that there is only oneness, the way I like to explain oneness is that there's different vibrations within the oneness. So if I want salt, I don't want pepper. And if I want pepper, I don't want salt. But everything's connected. And the interconnection of life is very much proven by physics. So that they say a butterfly fluttering its wings somewhere in South America can affect the whole world. And when we shift our own level of consciousness, we contribute to the evolution of everyone everywhere. So also, I think that these spiral dynamic levels help us understand where we get stuck. So when we're stuck, I think that part of it is that we've really bought into the worldview of our current situation.
Yeah.
And a good way to get unstuck is to start questioning your reality. Now, what do the higher levels mean? So you're talking about the first tier, which is beige, purple, red, blue, and orange, and green. And the second tier is yellow and turquoise. So what happens to us as human beings as we evolve into these second tier levels of existence?
Yeah, before I say this, it's important to realize that the rest of the spiral still lives on inside you. So,
Yeah.
you know, you might realize this stuff, but that all that stuff's still behind you, you know.
Yeah. Or
Sometimes not so well integrated, sometimes well integrated.
Or another way of putting it is as you evolve, you still understand these other levels, right? It's
Yeah,
like I understand living by rules and I understand wanting material success. And I understand having a humanitarian point of view, and I have this bigger picture of life.
yeah. Well, that's what yellow really is. I like to think of yellow as you see the Russian doll of human evolution. Whereas when you're in any of the first tier levels, for some reason, it just seems like everyone who doesn't agree with you is wrong. And you cannot understand why. It's impossible for some reason. Um, at yellow, you can, it's, I kind of like to think of, you can look at people and you can listen to them and you can try and gauge how they see the world, they see life, and how they go about life. And you can see where they're coming from. You don't have to necessarily agree with them, but you get it. So, and you can see that they themselves are like this Russian doll. They are like this spiral that has evolved to where they are now. So that's fundamentally second tier is about understanding, and it's about seeing the wholeness behind everything, and seeing that everything plays, everything sort of has a reason behind it. Everything has a wisdom behind it. A good example is like the American political situation. Sorry to bring it up. But when you're at second tier, I'm not saying you necessarily like the characters in the American political system, but to me, there's part of you that understands that something bigger is going on here that I don't necessarily understand.
Yeah,
Whereas if it's first here, you cannot understand that. You
right.
know, there's always a vilifying of everyone and their worldview and how they go about things.
Yes, I'm right. I'm right. You're wrong. Because
Yeah.
I've got it figured out according to my worldview. I want to share a little bit more about turquoise, this stage of oneness that we can evolve through. And so I'm a medical intuitive healer, and so many people ask me about how can I develop my intuition? Well, if you're in the first tier and you're in survival mode, you're not going to be listening to your soul. Another way of understanding soul
Mhm.
guidance, intuition, is that it's your soul guidance. So, at the turquoise level, that's where you live your life through soul guidance. And it's more of a mystical point of view of life, understanding that everything's connected. And as you said, that once you understand and accept that everything's connected, then everything has a purpose, even people and activities and events that we don't particularly like. There's a purpose and a meaning behind everything. And it's at the turquoise level that our intuition, I feel, naturally opens up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Ross Edwards is the author of an ebook, Spiral Dynamics Embodied, and you can learn about him at deeppsychology.com. We'll be right back. Ross Edwards, I would like to relate these 8 levels in spiral dynamics to the healing process. So if somebody's in survival mode, so anyone who's homeless would be in survival mode. And so for them, healing is getting them a roof over their head, getting them food, getting them water, right? Helping them survive war and famine and pandemics. And the purple level, people who are highly superstitious, they're going to put their faith in powers larger than themselves, right? Right. So these are going to be people who perhaps turn to their tribal healer. At red, in the power dynamic, then they're going to be breaking down all the rules. I mean, these are the rock stars. These are the people who look at the current situation and want to tear everything apart. How would you describe healing at the red level?
Oof, it's yeah. The question is how do you to me the question is how do you have them express all that without sort of minimizing the damage to
Right.
other people? Um
Yes. I would say that healing at the red level is literally about tearing things down. It's like this doesn't work, that doesn't work. It's about the dissolution of old structures. At the blue level, then healing is all about following rules. So you go to a nutritionist and they put you on a strict diet and you don't
yeah,
eat certain things and you
yeah.
eat at certain times and don't eat at other times, right? At the orange level, again, then you're going to go to a doctor and get $5,000 worth of lab tests, and they're going to measure every fluid are in your body and do all kinds of x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans. And then they're after, extensive scientific research, then they're going to give you several diagnoses based on science. At the green level, then we're going to begin to open up to natural healing remedies. We're going to
Yeah,
be, considering something other than traditional medicine.
yeah,
At the yellow level, then we're going to take an integrative approach. We're going to be like, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor and I'm going to get a diagnosis, and maybe I'm going to take my herbs and visit my energy healer. And at the turquoise level, what I find interesting, I've had clients and I tell them, you are going to do best with energetic remedies. In other words, their
mm,
energy is so sensitive that giving them a drug or even an herb is too much like a sledgehammer for them. And they're going to
mm.
do better with energetic remedies, homeopathy, flower essences, and energy healing. And practices like meditation, where they calm their mind and develop that deep peace inside them from which all healing naturally occurs.
I think it's very important to realize that um, each level has its own idea of what health is and how it must reach it. And that's even that itself is a very powerful thing to realize.
Yes, very well said, right? Because I have clients and they'll go, I only listen to my medical doctor. And it's like, okay,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But that's a world, it's a worldview thing.
Yes,
You
it's
know, it's
you.
it's thinking, well, the world is material 100% and we can measure it. If we can't measure it, then it's not really, it's not there.
Now, are there downsides to the later stages? So, as we talk about this, it might appear that we're
Yeah.
saying everybody needs to evolve to yellow and turquoise. Are there
Yeah, I th
downsides to these later stages?
yeah, I think that's why I said quite early on in the episode that um each stage only arises with corresponding life conditions, like socially, culturally, technologically, and so on. And so you will not get orange, green, yellow, turquoise in certain situations. And for many thousands of years, they weren't even in like the most basic, they weren't visible at all. Um, that said, one downside I think is on one hand, you feel like you can see more and understand more and see how things are all really interconnected when you're at these levels. So it feels like a greater understanding, a greater wholeness. You feel more whole as a person. You feel like you understand other people as well. Your life feels more complete. At the same time, you can feel more lonely
Mm.
because it's like you're speaking a different language. I mean, I'm interested to hear what you say, but that's something I've found personally is that you this can sound quite kind of arrogant, but I'm just trying to describe how it feels. It's like a parent and a child. The parent can understand the child, but the child can't understand the parent because there's a mismatch. And I feel that happens not with I don't have children. It happens with just other people. It's like I feel like I need to adapt and sort of bite my tongue a little bit because I can see more than you can. I know it sounds really horrendously arrogant, but you you we can't connect, you know. That's one of the tricky things I find.
I think, Russ Edwards, what you're referring to as, in my view, everyone needs what I refer to as spiritual family and spiritual community. So, what do I mean by that? So, if you're alive, somewhere, somehow, you had a mother and a father, even if you don't know them right now, or even if they passed away, or even if you were adopted. And so you have a birth family. And my understanding, your birth family is really here to give you a body. And then if you have anything to do with them after that, it's really a bonus. But as we go out into the world and evolve, then we can find like-minded people. And as you say, when we're at these more complete stages, more evolved stages of layers of complexity, we can understand other people, understand like why I'm, putting a wrecking ball to the American political system, or why I'm, why I feel the
Who's
need,
doing that?
or why I feel the need to follow all these rules in order to be healthy or happy. We can understand all this, but at the same time, we feel comforted by the companionship of like-minded people. And that's one of the reasons I really enjoy interviewing people such as yourself for the Natural Healing Show, because I get to talk to the top healers in the world every week and share your wonderful ideas with others. So everyone needs spiritual family. And what I mean by spiritual family is people who share our worldview, who can be our compatriots. And then spiritual community is this bigger picture of like-minded people. And we can certainly find spiritual community in our mosques, in our synagogue, in our churches, in our meditation group, but we can also find it in our yoga class, in our knitting circles, in our gardening clubs, right? On our golf clubs. Like, whenever you're around people who share the same interests and hobbies that you do, you can help find your spiritual community. And I do feel that so important. And like you, Ross Edwards, I have a meditation practice and a prayer practice. I'm 65 years old, I'm not married, and I don't have children, but I am not lonely. And one of the things that keeps me from feeling lonely is my prayer practice, because I pray for a group of people by name, one by one, every day. And through my prayer practice, I feel deeply connected to them. And also through meditation, I feel deeply connected to the spiritual world.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I just remembered there that there are rough percentages out there for these levels and how, in certain parts of the world, how prevalent they are. And the yellow turquoise is less than 10%.
Mhm.
So it kind of explains that that can be a problem. The other thing I'd say is that these levels, paradoxically, they also seek wholeness naturally. And so, and because you understand others more deeply and where they're coming from, maybe you can actually connect. You might not find, they might not have the same worldview, but you're not sort of grinding against the worldview so much because you've got that second tier point of view. So it's kind of
Yes,
a paradoxical
yes.
thing.
And I agree. I think when you have that second tier point of view, you see the humanity in everyone. And it's like, okay, well, we all like puppies, or we all like a beautiful day, or we all like a beautiful garden. Or we all like to sit comfortably in a nice armchair and relax.
Yeah,
Now, Ross
yeah.
Edwards, you're a meditation teacher. How does meditation fit into this view, this spiral dynamics worldview? And how does meditation help us to evolve to these more complex levels?
Yeah. It's one um thinker that I really love is Ken Wilber. Um, he calls these stages of development, which includes biodynamics, but there's many, many models for them. He calls them, he describes them as like the rules of grammar. So basically, we live them and we use them without thinking about it. But the problem is because it's so ingrained, we can't see them. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be an issue, but when you're into personal development, self-understanding, growing as a person, reintegrating, and so on, what meditation will do is what I've found, particularly with the spiral dynamics or the levels of development perspective, is it helps you see beyond just the gross mind, like your everyday desires and short-term motivations and this and that. How am I taking care of things? And it helps you connect to the more subtle aspects of who you are. And I find that that's where you're going to see these levels more easily because it's sort of a level back from our most gross level of awareness. And so meditation, I find it gives you that clarity where you can see the workings of your psyche more easily. And when you know these levels, when you like study the theory or to some degree, you can actually start to see like, oh, and maybe before I would have just heard that thought in my mind, or I would have had that feeling in my body, that urge. And now I can see, okay, behind that, maybe there's an orange drive, maybe there's a green drive, maybe there's a blue drive, maybe there's a red drive. And you can start to see this. What it does is it makes it all conscious. And once you can see it, your identity is then starting to be free of it. And that's when it's like what you said 5 or 10 minutes ago is that when you're in a level, you get stuck there, but you don't necessarily realize it. Maybe other people can realize it. That the way you're seeing the world and the way you're acting and the way your motivations are isn't really apt for the life you're living or the times or whatever it is. And as soon as you make that more conscious, that's when you can start to see beyond it. There's actually an interesting study, and I can't remember the exact conclusion. And I'm careful not to just believe in what studies say, but I think it was an interesting conclusion. There was a study done in the US that by people who know about these levels of development models, and what they basically concluded is that meditation helps growth in the levels of development.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Our guest today has been the one and only Ross Edwards, author and meditation teacher. And you can find out more about Ross Edwards and his wonderful work at his website, deep-psychology.com. And remember that your view of healing very much will be determined by your level of personal evolution. And so, how you think about what you need to heal is going to be determined by this. And also, there's this larger picture. And when we accept and embrace this larger picture, then you begin to heal yourself naturally. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.